What did people usually associate France with in the past? Beauty, fashion, and croissants. But in recent years, it's increasingly been associated with political crises, riots, and a poorly managed migration policy. And it's the last point that we're going to talk about today. This topic is closely connected to both the riots and the political instability. But let's start from the very beginning. Migration to France actually began back in the mid-19th century during the peak of industrial development. Migration policy at that time served two main purposes. On the one hand, it was meant to meet the country's demand for labor and improve its demographic situation. Most migrants back then came from neighboring countries like Belgium and Italy. On the other hand, France also became a refuge for many military and political exiles, for example, Russians fleeing the Bolshevik regime after the October Revolution, or Armenians escaping persecution by the Turks. During First World War, many migrants successfully integrated into French society. By the end of the war, their share was around 3% of the total population. This period is known as the first wave of migration. The second wave began after First World War and was much larger in scale. It was primarily labor migration again. France needed workers to rebuild the country, and wages were significantly higher than in many other European countries, let alone the colonies in North Africa. Migrants now came not only from Italy and Belgium, but also from Spain, Poland, and North African colonies. By 1931, the country had nearly 3 million migrants, about 7% of the population. However, most of them were temporary workers and never intended to settle permanently. That's why during the economic crisis of the 1930s and Second World War, not only did immigration stop, but the number of migrants already in France was cut nearly in half. So it's no surprise that after the war ended, France didn't change its open migration policy. In 1945, a new immigration law was adopted, which reinforced the existing policy. Thanks to this and the effort to rebuild the country after the war, the 1950s to 1970s saw the third wave of migration. By 1976, France had around 4 million immigrants again, about 7% of the population. The national composition of migrants also changed. 22% Portuguese, 21 Algerians, 15 Spanish, 13 Italians, 8 Moroccans, 4 Tunisians, 5 Sub-Saharan Africans, 5 Turks. Around the 1950s, birth rates between the French and the migrants began to diverge. Arab families had on average 5-6 children, Portuguese families around 3, while native French families had no more than 2. Even though migrant birth rates declined somewhat over time, they still remained significantly higher than those of the French. The third wave, like the second, was mostly labor migration. Typically, after working in France for 3 to 5 years, many migrants would return home. But gradually, more and more chose to stay. Their children grew up in France, often never even visiting their parents' homeland Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and so on. But as uncontrolled immigration grew and the economy weakened in the 1970s, unemployment soared. As a result, the French government was forced to stop accepting new migrants. In the mid-1970s, a ban was even imposed on hiring foreign labor. Employers who violated it faced penalties. The fourth wave of migration began in the mid-1980s. This time, the majority were Africans coming not to work but to live permanently in France. Several factors came together. The economic situation in neighboring countries like Portugal, Spain, and Italy had improved, so migration from there dropped sharply. At the same time, many from the third wave had already settled in France, creating Arab neighborhoods populated mostly by people born in France but of immigrant descent. Even though migration restrictions remained in place until the late 1990s, the goal being zero illegal migration, including stricter citizenship rules, the political course changed by the end of the decade. Restrictions were relaxed, and a large number of undocumented migrants were granted amnesty. The rule granting citizenship to anyone born on French soil was reinstated. Social policies also changed. New Arab migrants no longer filled labor shortages. They took only the jobs that earlier migrants had rejected in favor of living on welfare. And remember, the fourth wave came not to work but simply to live in France. Later it became clear many children of Muslim migrants reject assimilation, something their parents often managed. Surprisingly, integration for the second generation proved harder than for the first. This can be explained by the geographical closeness of Arab countries, high birth rates, and the strong role of Islam not just as a religion, but as a cultural way of life. Today, about 1/3 of France's population is of non-French origin. These are mostly people with French passports but descended from North African and other migrants. They follow different religions and cultures and therefore live by a different social code. The unwillingness of many to assimilate, their concentration in migrant neighborhoods, dependence on welfare, and high unemployment have sharpened social tensions. Crime rates have risen, and many native French no longer want to live in such areas, preferring to move away. Why? Because they feel unsafe, uncomfortable, out of place, just as many migrants once felt in their own countries, prompting them to move to France in the first place. It's a paradox, isn't it? People leave their homes and families for a better life, but once they settle, they recreate the exact same environment they fled from, without realizing that their old problems were caused by flawed rules. Unemployment among migrants is driven by their unstable legal status, lower education levels, lack of experience in the French job market, and weak language skills. Illegal migration has grown, with many working on the black market. Migration flows have also contributed to the Islamization of French society, fueling religious and interethnic tensions. The share of Muslims in France is estimated at 4-9, one of the highest rates in Europe. Most are migrants or descendants of labor migrants. Minority communities living in city suburbs have become a strong base for spreading Islamic ideology, with some groups demanding that Islamic norms be accepted as the social standard, which, of course, clashes with France's secular culture. Naturally, ordinary French citizens are far from thrilled. But migrants alone aren't to blame. French authorities also bear responsibility for ignoring citizens' concerns for years. It's no surprise that right-wing parties have gained popularity across Europe. They make migration their top priority and promise radical solutions, earning support from native populations. The pattern is clear: when migrant numbers are small, society successfully integrates them. But when the numbers grow too large, migrants tend to cling to their identity, and locals start seeing them as outsiders. The result? Ghettos, mutual hostility, and riots, exactly what happened in France. The French government now recognizes its mistakes and is trying to fix the situation, but whether it can succeed in the coming years remains a big question. Still, better late than never. Migration policy is a complex process that must be carefully managed by the state, not just in France, but in every country. By the way, let me know in the comments which country's migration history you'd like me to cover next. Subscribe to my channel. We talk about migration in Europe.